And then we have Laura Mullen, the author of 2 collections of poetry, The Surface and After I Was Dead, and a book-led postmodern Gothic, The Tales of Horror. Her work has recently appeared in Chain, Fracture, Ploughshares, and on Black Ice at the OrgX site. She also has an essay on Cinderella's slipper called Wearing It Out in the Footnotes anthology, Essays on Shoes. And then we have John Yao, a poet, critic, fiction writer, and publisher. His writing on art has appeared in Art Forum, Art News, Art on Paper, and Art in America. He has written catalogue essays, monographs, and critical studies on Jasper Johns and Andy Warhol, among many others. His recent books include My Heart is That Eternal Rose Tattoo and Borrowed Love Poems. He is the critic in residence at the Mount Royal Graduate School, Maryland Institute of Art, and teaches at the Avery Graduate School, Bard College. He lives in New York. I'm me and I live on the I'll just begin with a few general comments and then invite each of the writers to give a brief presentation.
Discussion topic, technologies and gestures, or the company barbecue. Unquestioned understanding. Of course you burn a love letter, historical and literary precedents, the wings of the dove, etc. But even as we imagine the tender words like tears splashed the paper, vanishing into black ash, a question occurs. What if, as is so likely in our moment, the letter was written on a computer? C.F. Benjamin, The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, etc. Oh, not a love letter? Our desire to allot specific technologies to defined areas of feeling and limited gestures is itself worth a paper. Discuss the differences in texture of event between burning a love letter and shredding documents. Why don't we shred love letters? If it comes out that Ollie North and Farm Hall sat up late burning the Iran-Contra evidence together, do we think they were in love? What's changed if employees at Arthur Andersen burn papers relating to the Enron account? And if the papers are used to help the cold catch beneath that startled and stiff-suckling pig on a spit as full of righteous indignation as any executive? Question. What would you say from a house on fire? Answer. The fire. Backdraft. For days now we've been reading, under the news reports, the easy cliches this letter would have had to include. A fire beginning, I love you. A fire beginning, I want to start over. The tears in the reader's eyes give the air a heat shimmer. Okay, now you have 2 hours to go back in and bring out everything you want to say forever. As is so often the case, the words had a powerful effect, though not the one intended by their author. Hey Ray, what do you say? In more stories than I can count, which function despite appearances as instruction manuals for if not good then at least better behavior, our heroine brusquely crumbles the letter, thinks for a minute, unfolds it again, and putting the offending document on the seat beside her, drives home. Which doesn't have the possibly requisite fender bender, late 20th century epiphany territory, a chance for some necessary soul searching. She arrives home. No, the girls are at school. Lowers the blind, pours herself a drink, and plays something like Smoke on the Water, or Smoke Gets in Your Eyes, over and over. It's as if what she's read has seared itself into her memory, the rhythm of those terse sentences with their focus on physical details, e.g., the sound of the ice against the glass made a cool noise which pleased her. The rule. Sometimes trying to rekindle an old flame works, but frequently the best advice we can give a woman who thinks she's still in love with her ex is, next. The plea, innocence. The sentence. We have yet to take our thinking about fiction to the level of the sentence. Story number 4. In the custody of the third person, the report lists our protagonist's age, 38, and the sentence describing her as, quote, dry-eyed as she entered the plea. The report continues, but after Thursday's hearing got underway, she wiped away tears and reached for a tissue as one witness, U.S. Forest Service Special Agent Brenda Schultz, said it appeared she had moved rocks from a campfire to allow the fire to escape and ignite surrounding brush. Tip sheet. It's a tremendous challenge to transform characters made of ink and paper into people capable of drawing laughter and tears from unknown readers. The creation of the hero and heroine in a romance can be fraught with unique problems, and as the number of romance novels multiplies daily, writers are challenged anew to breathe life and individuality into these two people who have often been labeled cardboard cutout stereotypes by critics. Advice from a poet, dead. No tears for the writer, no tears for the reader. Discussion topic, gesture and technologies. Loyola's journal charted his spiritual progress by recording his degree of responsiveness to the act of worship, recording the absence or presence, while praying, of tears. The discuss other instances from life or literature in which this bodily function marks a dissolve between public, exterior, and private, interior. In your own experience, does this tend to be a gender-specific technology? What do tears stand for here? Questions for further study. What are the social benefits of a legible body? What costs might be involved, both presently and in the future? Who pays and how? Story number 4A. She dreams of being a fire inspector, a debris sifter, one of the experts called in after the whole thing's over. She can tell you how everything happened there in order, just one glance, and she knows how this one began. She shakes her head. You can't see her eyes behind the sunglasses, but her mouth is grim. You see what I see? She asks. But we never do. Not ever. Not until she tells us what to see. She sifts the evidence into a carefully labeled plastic bag, and we notice the tan line on her left hand's ringless third finger. Debris or not debris. It was expressing John's feelings for Terry, that he loved her and wanted to get back together with her. These astonishing, romantic sunsets, static in the background, heavily amplified to stand for the sound of the fire, heavily overgrown forests, residential construction in so-called red areas, some noise about an increase in the population of wood-eating beetles, and almost no snowpack. Now you're getting warmer. My father's house sat on a little over an acre of land. Now imagine that house and land times 137,000. Fuck it, my friend's tattoo says, burn everything. The problem of breathing in this atmosphere. Questions for further study. Do you think we could just start over?
One of the things I sort of thought I'd make a little preface. I wrote a book on Andy Warhol, and it came about. I was with Charles Simic, and he was writing a book on Joseph Cornell for this series that Echo Press is doing. We were sitting in a bar, and I said, "Oh, my publisher, editor Dan Halpern's going to come over soon. You should do a book for him on an artist." I said, "Okay." Up to that moment, I had no thought of who I'd write about. And then Daniel Halpern came in and talked, and Charles Simic said, "Oh, you should talk to John Washington." Dan Halpern said, "Who would you like to write about?" And I blurted out, first thought, best thought, Andy Warhol. I thought, why am I going to write a book on Andy Warhol? So I decided I wanted to write a book on him because I wanted to see him in a way for myself, not the way I've been seeing him. The other thing I'd like to say is, or there's three things. The second thing I'd like to say is one of the things that